So now that we have the homepage all finished, let's go ahead and move on to the podcast index page. So let's refer back to our wireframe. So originally I was thinking a background image with a title on top, right beneath the navigation. And I still like that idea. So let's go back to Photoshop and mock that up. So let's look through the photography I've downloaded for this app and pick one to use for the podcast index page. I really like this one just because it looks like he's sitting, chilling, contemplating. I wish he had headphones in, that'd be perfect. But if this was a real app with funding and all, I'd probably take custom photography. But since it's not, we can just use the best we have. This one's pretty good too. He's kind of just standing there looking out. But if we refer back to this, it's not going to be as tall. So we need to think about the cropping of the image. So this one may be good because we could crop it just around him and still have the background and then have the title centered. Same with the old man fishing. He might get cut off, so it might look like he's floating. So maybe that may not be the best choice. Let's give this one a try. Let's go to Photoshop. Make it full screen. I'm holding Shift and Option while I drag. And then I'm going to hit M to grab the marquee tool, and I'm just going to drag. Let's make it like 600 pixels high. Something like that. And then if I go over to the layer setting down at the bottom, I can hit the mask tool and it will create a mask. Let me delete this type. Something like that may actually be pretty cool. Let's create a new layer and hit Option and go between the two layers in the layers panel and click. And this will make sure that anything in layer 1, the layer we just created, is only applied to that image. So what I'm going to do is go to Edit, Fill, and I'm going to fill it with black, and then I'm going to drop the opacity to darken it up a bit. And I'm doing this just because I want the focus less on the photography and more on the copy that we're going to have on top. So that actually looks pretty good. Let me go back to the home page. I'm just going to copy this text so we have the same font. I don't think we need to have this one for the index page. Let's just have discover your new favorite podcast, period. Then let's center that. Maybe make it a bit smaller. It is a little busy around with all the different layers of different clothing and such. Maybe let's try a different image. So what I'll do is I'll select this image and then I'll go back to our photography. Let me try this one. And I'm just going to drag it on top, and this will place it between those layers. So that looks pretty good. What I'm going to do is hold Command and click on the mask, and then that will put a marquee around the same outline. And then I will put a mask around this layer as well. So that looks pretty cool. I actually dig that a lot. It's a lot cleaner. It's got him looking out into the distance, possibly listening to a podcast for all we know. So I'm gonna go with that for now. That looks pretty good. Let's select all these. I don't think the header should be that high. That looks pretty good. Now let's copy the text for the navigation, and let's make sure it's centered. Beautiful. Now I'm going to double click on this layer and change it that black color we chose. Remember the color scheme we have here. I chose like the orangish red, and then the darker color, and then the dark grayish blue, and then the lighter version of that. So I'll make both the title and the logo that dark gray color. That looks pretty good. Those are definitely not lined up though. So I will bump up the logo to match. Let me use guide to make some quick guides as well. Beautiful. Oh, and by the way, I am using a pretty big document, 2880 width by 5000 pixels high, just because I know we're going to need a few rows of the podcast, so it's going to take up some height. It's still not perfectly centered. I usually just eyeball this because, again, I'm going to make sure it's perfect within the code. All right, that looks pretty good. So now we got our navigation, we got our banner, the image, discover your new favorite podcast. I don't like right here how it's up against his shirt. It's creating a bit of visual tension just because they're so close. So what I'm going to do is select this. I have the auto select layer on, by the way, up at the upper left corner. So I can just click on a layer and select it, and then I'm going to hit Command T and shrink it down. There we go. I like that a lot more. So as I was going through and grabbing some of the podcasts that I listened to, I was grabbing the cover images for those to use in this design. And I realized that pretty much all podcast covers are a square pixel ratio. So I'm thinking if we stick to the 3 column grid, it's going to make the rows pretty high height-wise, and some of the content might get cut off. So I was thinking instead we should maybe do a 4 column grid. Let's just make a quick grid real quick. I will do 5% on each side, 4 columns. I'll make each grid 20%, and let's make the column gutters 3.33%. Let's give that a try. Beautiful. And I wonder if I can, let's remove the center points and then the extra one right here. That looks great. Okay, so we definitely want a bit of spacing between the banner and where the podcasts start, just so everything's grouped visually together. So I'm just going to grab some of the cover images I downloaded, and we'll start laying all this out. Wish these were all the same size, but they are not. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to manually one by one. It's kind of a pain, but we'll make sure they're all the same size. By the way, if you listen to podcasts, these are all fantastic podcasts. Narwhals in particular is about design, development, and business. It's kind of like a unicorn on steroids. Okay, so now that we've got some to work with, I'm just gonna quickly lay these out. All right, awesome. Whoops. I accidentally selected these. I'm gonna select actually all of this on the top and make sure it's down at the bottom. There we go. And then I'm gonna select all those and lock those for now. That way I can't select them and everything will be good. Okay, so this is already coming along pretty good. Oh, I think I've hidden one. There we go. All right, let's just focus on one for now. I want these to be differentiated from the background. So what I'll do is I'm going to create a layer with rounded corners. I'm just going to start, let me bring up the guides again. And I'm going to make this a bit deeper than the cover image. That way we have space for the title and either the description, if we go with that, or the episode count. All right, that's looking good. I'll select A and select that, and then I'm going to get rid of the stroke because we don't want that. I'm going to keep the background as white. There we go. Put it behind the narwhal's cover image. And then I'm going to double click on the rounded corners layer, add a drop shadow, and let's just play with this a bit. Try making it 90%. Distance, bring it down to maybe 3. Size, definitely want to bring that down. Let's make it 2, and then the opacity. Blend mode, let's change to normal. And the opacity will drop down. We don't want this to be a big, bold thing. We want it to be very subtle, so it doesn't take away from the actual content. That looks pretty good. Maybe make the size a bit bigger. All right, so 20% opacity, 3 pixels distance, 0 spread, 6 on the size. That looks pretty good for now. We can always tweak it later. And then another thing is, if you noticed, this has a rounded corner. I'm actually going to bump that up a bit, maybe to 8 pixels. But the narwhal's, or the cover image, does not have that same rounded corner. So what I will do is I'll hit Command and click on that layer to bring up the marquee around it. And then on the narwhal's, I will put a mask around it. Like so. That way on the top it has the rounded corners, but on the bottom it's nice and flat. That looks pretty great. So what I'm going to do is just bring up a text layer. I'll say Narwhal's podcast. Select it, Command T to bring open character presets. Let's get rid of the all caps and the kerning, and let's drop down the size quite a bit. And instead of semi-bold, let's try making this bold. Looks pretty good. Let's make it the same width. Again, just eyeballing this, we'll clean it up in code. Cool, that's looking pretty good. I think a description would be a bit too much on this page, so I'm just gonna do the episode count. So I'll say something like 22 episodes, and then we can do the episode count for each podcast. And then instead of bold, let's make this regular. Drop the font size down a bit smaller, so visually it doesn't take up as much priority. Let's center those a bit. Actually, let's bring it up, and then I'm going to select the background and bring that up. Beautiful. And then finally, let's change the color of this to make it lighter and stand out a bit less. Actually, let's grab this color, selecting eye, and grabbing the eye color, or eyedropper tool, and T to click in there, and then I'm just gonna do the eyedropper on that. And let's make it a bit tighter, and then center those. That looks pretty good. What do you guys think? I'm liking it. All right, so let's move on. I'm just going to select these and then hit Option and click and drag those over. Bring up the guides, make sure it's lined up. Cool. Now let's grab the Sean West layer, bring it up top. And again, hit the marquee by doing Command and clicking on the rounded rectangle. And then let's add a mask to the Sean West podcast. Change this, Sean West. This should actually be not text line centered, but right justified. So let's fix that. Sean West has like 1 million episodes, so I'll say 281, just get a random number. And then I will do the same for these two. And then let's grab the Startup School and the Rocket Ship podcast, drag those up. Beautiful. Now let's select the marquee, grab the Rocket Ship Podcast image and put a mask on that. Let's do the same for, the Startup School. And then let's change the name. Change the name and the episode count. I guess these don't really have to say podcast because Narwhals isn't Narwhals Podcast, it's just kind of called Narwhals. That looks pretty good. Let's select all of this and bring it up a bit more. So I really like this because we got some nice visual hierarchy. They'll see the navigation. Well, this will be the first thing just because the visual weight it holds. Discover your new favorite podcast. Then when they scroll down, they'll see the various podcasts. Let's quickly select all these and then do the same for the bottom row. Beautiful. And then I'm going to select these 4, bring it up to the top. Great. Now let's do the same for the others real quick. Fizzle Show. Boom, grab the Fizzle Show. The Fizzle Show podcast doesn't go to the edge, so let's fix that. Let's just drag it out slightly. And then when we put the mask on it, the excess will get cut off. Like so. Beautiful. Let's do the same for DIY video guide. Actually, that's not. Let's make that a bit bigger so it gets cut off. Put a mask on it. Great. And now the Execute podcast, I'm just gonna make it a bit bigger and do the same. Execute. That looks pretty good. Let's bring this up so there's the same amount of spacing between visually between the podcasts on either side. That looks pretty good. What do you guys think? I'm liking it. So obviously our layers panel is a complete disaster at the moment, so I'm going to clean that up. I'm just going to go to the top, click the top layer and go down to the bottom, create a new folder. I'll call this Narwhals. Select everything from that and then go down and drag that into the Narwhals folder. And then I'll do the same for the Sean West podcast and the others. This is usually how I work. It's not the best, honestly. And what I mean by that is my layer panels are usually a complete disaster, but at the end I usually go through and clean it all up, especially if I have to pass it off to someone else. For podcast or for projects just that I'm doing on my own, sometimes I don't worry about it, but it's good practice to have good Photoshop etiquette and keep things nice and clean. And the reason I am hiding these is just to see which ones I've knocked out already. Let's just create 4 new. I'll call this Execute. Group 3, DIY Video Guy. Group 4, The Fizzle Show. And then Startup. Right, now I'm just going to select those and bring them into their respective layers. DIY Video Guy. Fizzle Show. Startup. Beautiful. Now let's make a new group and I'll call this Podcasts. And I'm going to select all of these folders and bring them under here. There we go. Nice and clean. Haha. Okay, looks great. Next thing we need to do is, well, we'll probably have more than one row. So I'm just going to select these There we go. Just because it's a mock-up, we don't need a new podcast for each. This is looking pretty good. We'll probably have about 8 or 12 per page. So obviously we'll need pagination. So let's design that. What I'm going to do is grab the rounded corner tool, and I'm just going to hold shift and create a small little button. Select the A key, and I'm going to go up to the top, get rid of the stroke. And then let's double click on the box and select a color for it. Whoops, the fill is actually set to nothing. So go up to the fill at the top left and change the color. That's a bit too much for the button. Let's make it quite a bit lighter actually. Maybe something, there we go. Okay, so what I will need to do is create duplicates of this. And I'm holding shift and option while I drag these out. And then I will create a type tool, and I'll just say 1. Let's bring that up. That's probably a bit too large. Command T, and then let's shrink it down a bit. And then I'm gonna do the same. Hold option shift, change that to 2, make it centered. I'm hitting the command or the T to bring up the type tool, and then the escape to get out of it, and then the V to get back to the selection tool. That looks pretty good. Let's also make bigger buttons like so. And let's say previous. If there is no previous, I want this to be kind of grayed out. So what I'm going to do is make it slightly darker than this text so you can still see it, but it's not as prevalent. And then I'm just going to copy this, do the same thing over here, and I'll do next. Except I will change the color back to the bold gray. Looks good. I still think this color's a bit too dark. Maybe that's even a bit too dark. Yeah, I'm liking that. So I'm gonna double click to open up the color for each of these, and then just use the eyedropper to select the new ones. Boom. All right, and then we also need something for the page we are on, like a highlight color. So I'm gonna grab this again and select this, double click, and I'm gonna go over to the panel, and then obviously that dark doesn't look good any longer. So let's change it to like a white font. All right, so we can do a slightly gray background with the dark text for each button. The highlight color we have chosen for our app, we can use for the current page, and then also when you hover over, we can change it to the highlight color as well. But let's select all of this, create a new group, and call this pagination. And it should be beneath podcasts. And actually podcast should be beneath the header and such. Let's ungroup this. Create 2 new folders, call 1 header and 1 banner. Put the nav logo in the header, and the title and the image in the banner. There we go, everything's nice and clean. Now let's select the pagination, bring it up a bit. Actually, that's way too close. So this looks pretty good. I'm liking how this is coming out. So last thing I'm going to do is hit the C command for the crop tool, and I'm just going to bring up the canvas and hit enter to crop it. and then V to get out of the crop tool. This is looking great. So next we will design the podcast show page.